Welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast, the show that flips the script on cybersecurity. I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing IT and business leaders about why we need to protect people, not just machines and data, to stop breaches and empower businesses to achieve their missions. Hello and welcome to another episode of the RE Human Layer Security podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to Anne Benigsen, the Chief Information Security Officer at Bankers Bank of the West. Anne has over 25 years of experience in IT and over a decade of experience in information security and banking. She's particularly passionate about ensuring community banks are prepared for the rapid changes in cybersecurity and technology, of which she says addressing the human factor is key. Anne, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tim, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
To start things off, perhaps you could tell us a bit about your role as a CISO. What are some of the highlights and what are some of the lowlights?
Well, when I started off, my role was actually all things information, and that included information security and cybersecurity. And when it comes to the highlights and lowlights, they're actually the same. Banks, in my opinion, via Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act, GLBA, and regulation, I think they understood the privacy portion of security a lot earlier than other industries. But when it came to cybersecurity or information security and emphasizing that pure importance of cybersecurity, information security, that only started in banking really in about 2014, because that's when the NIST cybersecurity framework came out. It took a few months for us to start getting the FFIEC, which is the conglomeration of all of our regulatory agencies. It took them until 2015 to really put out things like our cybersecurity assessment tool to put out more information and regulation information. And then financial institutions had to get on board. So we are talking a scant 5-6 years ago when all of that happened. And when you have institutions that are not IT or IS institutions, it's a slower process because you've got that legacy software, you've got that legacy hardware, and you have finance, and finance is risk adverse. For way, way, way too long, risk adverse meant change resistance and change adverse, especially when it came to IT and IS, because we were layering on security on top of technology that was still not understood. So we had levels of misunderstanding, not understanding, not happening in finance. And getting that learning, getting that education for the non-technical industry people, the finance people, to understand security and technology and how it related to the business, that was really important. And that obviously took time, and it took a different type of security person. Because as security people, I might have my couple decades in technology, that's great, but I don't have that in banking. So how can I communicate with these people so that I can talk their language? Because I can't expect them in a year to magically become an IT person, nor should they. So we needed to meet in the middle. And to do that, I realized that in finance, we really need to understand the business. We need to understand the ramifications of technology and security to the business. That means understanding the income statement and the balance sheet. That means having conversations about NIM and ROI. That means showing true knowledge about the other risks that aren't ours, about the industry, and not just the ones that pertain to our field. To cybersecurity, to information security. And that's always been the challenge. And that's always been the highlight as well. It's keeping up with the tech, keeping up with the security, but also keeping up with the financial industry so I can encourage the bankers and the financial people to want to be part of our world, to want to bake in security because they understand it, and they understand it because I understand them.
And I love that overview there. And we often hear that, we think of financial services as kind of being ahead of the curve in terms of security. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or would you disagree with that?
It matters what area of security. As you know, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, the security industry has expanded. Saying I'm good in security is a big question mark. I think that financial institutions are fantastic at privacy, but as you know, that's not all of security, right? Um, in privacy, protecting information, if you really look at how often financial institutions have been breached, what has been taken, and then you look at healthcare or you look at other industries, we're actually doing relatively well. If you look at our mean time to discovery for incidents, breaches, I think it's a 280 days for the rest of the industries, at 233 for banks. Now, we're still talking in the 200s, so that's bad. But you see how we're better at it simply because we've had to hold on to important things for so long. But one of the challenges is we've had to hold on to these things for so long, for decades. That means that we've been doing this with technology in one way, shape, or form for decades. And whenever you talk about decades, you're talking about legacy systems. And I think that that is what the financial institutions in general are really working towards. It's converting legacy systems into things that can be more secured, things that can be more future looking. And if I had to choose what our one real weakness is, I would say that is truly what it is making sure that what we have is modern, is current, is truly securing the crown jewels, now that the crown jewels aren't, gold bullion in a vault.
Could you give us an example of what some of those legacy systems are? So I began my career working in a bank, and I've seen a little bit of the green screen terminals, but
and there are still green screen terminals. Those still exist legitimately. There is still a lot of text-based things, just like in the travel industry. I don't know if you've ever seen the travel industry, how tickets are done or how travel agents or the airline people book things. It's all via command line. There is still so much command line in there. But as you know, what matters isn't necessarily that front end, it's what the back end is. And often what I've seen, I can't go into great detail about this, is you have that layered build, where you have older technology, older developments, and then you build on top of it. And you keep building on top of it. But in the end, you still have some of those older bits and pieces where you'd have to tear down the structure in order to make it work. An example I can say for Bankers Bank of the West is we were using older database software, not EOL, but definitely nothing that I wanted to work with. So when I came on board and I saw how we were programmed and I saw we were still supported, but it really wasn't something that we could move forward with. It was, we need to redevelop 30 plus custom programs because we need to be able to we need to future proof some of our technology so that we can keep growing, so that we can keep offering things. If I don't have a system where an API is even possible, well, we're going to be out of date in a couple years if people can't connect in. So those are some of the challenges and when you think about finance, no matter what country you're in, you're talking about the economic structure of a country. You're talking about what people own and who they are. Banking has an interesting challenge of they cannot break that faith. So that is part of the reason there is such incredible change resistance in it, because if it has worked, if it doesn't, there will be a loss of faith in financial institutions. And when that happens, there could be a really large systemic problem.
Yeah, it's like that trust. I mean, that system of record is everything, underpins basically all of society. If we think maybe just back to a time before the NIST framework was introduced in 2014, go back almost a decade now, how has the industry as a whole evolved from a security perspective? What's changed in that time?
Everything. So, all right, going back, let's just say to 2010. In 2010, biometrics were an amazing thing if you had them. MFA was an amazing thing if you had it. And this isn't just for banking. This is for a lot of industries. Heck, a lot of industries still aren't using MFA. But having that level of security, the idea of back in 2010, if you had an 8-character password, that was considered efficient. Now, if you had an 8-character password, someone would be thwapping the back of your hand with a ruler. So if you think about the growth, you can almost go year by year, almost more than a decade, because it was so sudden. I mean, breaches have been happening for 30 plus years, 40 plus years, depending on what type of breaches or what type of, DOS. But 2010 to 2015 is when things really rapidly started changing. With banks, they will always try to keep privacy really key and keep security key because, again, they don't want the reputational hit for all financial institutions to impact them or the rest of the banking ecosphere. And in the US, you're talking about 5,000 community banks. You're talking about 5,000 credit unions. You're talking about a massive number. So change really has to come from the top. It has to come from law. It has to come from regulation. Individual banks can do things, but again, we don't have that central institution or agency telling us you must, except for the FFIEC. So an individual bank, a small bank somewhere in Eastern Colorado may choose to do all these great security controls and no one will know about it because they're just doing it independently because there is no connection. That's why FS-ISAC was created. The ISACs were created so there could start to be this communication. That's why it's one of my passions is getting banks educated and talking to each other, because what we don't want and what we have seen all over the world is we're reinventing wheels in industries that have already been made. If there is a product that's already out there, we should be using it, not trying to create a brand new product or a brand new guideline or a brand new framework. And integrating all of that, it's a challenge. And that is what I think banks are dealing with, is trying to say, what do we need? What should we have? What are we required to have? And then how do we do it? Sort of answer your question, sort of not.
No, I think that's a great answer. When talking with our team about this podcast, you mentioned that the human factor in information security is key. And it's interesting how many 3-year plans include a lot of Blinky boxes and very few tactical objectives other than keep doing phishing tests. So I'd love to get into this a little bit more. Why is the human factor key? And I guess how can securing the human layer help future-proof a business?
Well, first off, without people, we're nothing. There's no business that is anything unless you think about the humans, unless you think about the people. I mean, I think there are plenty of people who love to say that, well, we can automate things, but that's not there yet. Skynet hasn't taken over like that yet. Humans are in security on all levels, from the top to the bottom, to the people who implement, to the end user. And they are what can make or break policies, procedures, appliance, virtual machines. It's why I 100% believe you have to invest to ensure that people, humans, can be and will be protected when it comes to cybersecurity these days. And honestly, Tim, I don't think we've baked in security yet. I think there are very, very few industries that even can come close to it. It is still a layer on top of things. And if we're going to try to bake in that security, we have to start at the human layer. To be forward-looking, we have to start at the human layer, not at the Blinky box layer. And that means we have to make it our responsibility as security professionals, as leaders of organizations, IT or not, to start thinking of security as a default. So that means that's what we need to make a change. That's how we can bake it in, is when we believe that the default is having cybersecurity, is having a level or a layer of that protection. I really see when we look at cybersecurity as the same thing as a seatbelt or an airbag or locks on our doors, that's when we're baking it in. And that's why I say we are not there yet. And when you think about seatbelts, airbags, and locks, those are things that protect humans, right? We need the same thing when it comes to cybersecurity, where no one even thinks about it. You wouldn't buy a car without those things. So why would you go to a job? Why would you have a computer? Why would you get online if you didn't have cybersecurity? That I think needs to be our goal.
And I often talk to people about this challenge, the human layer. It's kind of our thing at Tessian. We talk about it a lot. And some security leaders say, but that is a people problem. And technology cannot solve the people problem. And of course, what I say, I actually sounds like we've got the same analogies here. But I say to people, well, cars have seatbelts, airbags, anti-lock brakes. Like that's all technology to protect you when you inevitably make a mistake when you're driving. What role do you think technology has to play in keeping people safe in an organization?
I think especially since what are we keeping safe? That's always what I usually ask when I'm helping out a bank or something is, do you know what you're trying to keep safe? Really? You can't say it's everything because we can't protect everything. When you're in your car, what are you trying to keep safe? You're really not even trying to keep yourself from getting broken legs if you get in an accident, right? You're trying to stay alive. You're trying to make sure your heart and your head and your chest are safe so that if you get in that accident, you don't die. In this case, we're looking at data, right? But what data? It's not all data. It's certain parts of data. And data is technology. That is the bits and bytes. You can't have data, digital data, without some sort of technology. You can't even have printed things without a certain level of technology. I often challenge people who say the same thing, and they say, well, we don't need technology. It's people. It is one and the same. If we were people who did not work on computers, if we were still doing things by hand on green and white ledgers, I would say, all right, good to go. Don't use that typewriter. But we're not. And in doing so, we have to build that acceptance. And that's something too with banking. We had to build the acceptance of, while it isn't the brain or the heart, because to me, that is the confidential and customer information for banks, IT is the skeleton. IT is the bones of the infrastructure. And you want to protect that because those are what protect and hold everything else. So at that point, if I heard someone say that, I said, we're going to have a really long discussion about what role technology has to play in your business. Start taking away the tech, take away your computers, take away your monitors, take away your phones. Are you still doing business? Take away your servers, take away the cloud, take away your email. Are you still doing business? And if the answer is no, then it's technology.
Yeah, I love that. No, I agree completely. One and the same. And it's all of that digital transformation that has enabled people in these new ways of working that essentially are the things that go wrong when people make the wrong decision, break a rule, get tricked, make a mistake, etc. But I think that's a great way to think about it. On to the second thing you said around those tactical objectives, other than to just keep doing phishing tests. What tactical objectives do you think IT and security leaders should be thinking about when it comes to securing the human layer of their organization? And what are some of those tactics that maybe you think we should be moving away from as an industry?
I'm being silent for a second so I don't get totally up on a soapbox here. All right. Because this is a big thing that I talk about a lot when it comes to banking and when it comes to strategic planning. And my issue is checkbox thinking. That security should not be checkbox thinking. This does actually relate to strategy. Security isn't a list of items, and it shouldn't be that regulatory or legal list of checkoff items. Security needs to be all-encompassing. It needs to hit all parts of the bank, the human layer, the technology layers, the business objectives. And that means, again, business-wide, thinking about helping all areas. Now, back to Blinky boxes. Too often we think about Blinky boxes, and in a strategic plan, in a tactical objective under modernizing, you will see something like ensure that the SIM is created, or make sure that we get a new, we convert to Cisco umbrella for better security. And to me, those are finite tasks that happen. And that is not strategy. Those should not be true objectives, true long-term objectives. That's like part of an action plan. And an example that I can give is most businesses have some sort of increase in customer growth or increase in the bottom line built into their strategic plan, right? You know, over the next 3 years, we are going to grow X. Now, security or infosec can be a separate line item. And I think during the beginning of a security transformation, that can be useful because it's pointing it out, it's putting it at the top, it's saying this is as important as other things in our strategic plan. But if you really want to try to bake this in after it is top of mind for people, after it is important to your board of directors, to your senior management, it has to be baked into the strategies themselves. It has to be baked into the good of the business. So going back to the human factor, right? Everything about a strategic plan involves humans doing something. It involves humans, sales, development, relationship managing, and making sure those humans then are secure, right? So you can have something about ROI. You can have something about, making sure that you have customer growth, and then bake in the security. So security is going to be implied in that strategy. Because how much time and money does business, email compromise? How much does it cost? Not just to remediate, but loss in productivity, substandard productivity, the fear that it then ensues in a company that then can impact profit. That is, to me, how security really starts showing. We impact the salespeople who are on the road-ish, on the Zoom call, to, the CEO who is looking over his financials. We're ensuring that that information is safe. When you're looking at tech companies, we're ensuring that your IP is safe. Because if that is lost, what is the cost? So you want to create 15 more patents. You want to apply for 15 patents this year. That's on a plan. How does security help that? I think that baking it in, once you get it to a point where people accept that security is important, it's saying, every single thing that is on your strategic plan, every single time there's a tactical objective for a department, often there is security on top of that technology that can not only help you, but give you that level and that peace of mind to be able to continue on and work really hard and do amazing things for your company. And too often we look at it the opposite way of, well, security is stopping you from doing your job. Instead of saying we are enabling you by ensuring that there aren't these huge roadblocks down the road.
And I wanted to go to, your current role, Anne, and your specific organization today, Bankers Bank of the West. Are you able to share some of the examples of how you've achieved that, baked in strategy versus a checkbox approach? And then again, are you able to share some examples of how you think about security actually helping accelerate and drive an organization versus being a handbrake and slowing people down?
All right, first thing then is really, how do we do it? Or how did we do it? And how did we get to where we are? Because I'm actually relatively pleased with where we are. There's always more work to be done, and there's always continuing work to be done. But the first thing that I did was to make security accessible. Too often, security people aren't even known by the company, or if they are, they're people who write nasty emails because you did something wrong. No one should be afraid of cybersecurity. No one should be afraid of talking to cybersecurity or security staff. Getting those lines of communication open is absolutely invaluable. And if that doesn't happen, the rest of the stuff tends to fall apart. The other portion of this, of course, is you must have buy-in from the tops of the company, from the directors, from the senior management. Again, that's not done. You can't really move forward easily. So those two things. The next thing is make sure people are trained on the tools. And that's something that we really try to do. It really sounds silly, but if you have this fish button, right, that report this phishing attempt, and no one knows what it does, they're not going to use it. or it's going to be used incorrectly and they're going to be reporting spam instead of phishing. And all of a sudden, if you've got some AIML tool, it'll really start messing it up. Or even worse, they're going to think, oh yeah, it's some other security thing. And they're going to roll their eyes, forget about it. And that will then create behavioral patterns that will go on forever, where they're just going to roll their eyes at the next security tool that you implement. If you make a policy, if you make a procedure, if you add in a tool, doing more than just having them read a document, that's key. Even if it's a video, a 5-minute video of me showing my screen and talking to them about clicking and how I would use it, that's key. Offer a roundtable, have an information security, a Teams group, a Slack channel. Open up something that I did. This was actually better in person, oddly, than remote, where they just have less questions. But you can put in a survey. If you're a Microsoft shop, you can use forums, you can use SurveyMonkey, make it anonymous. Have people push out questions, personal questions about security, business questions about security, and then answer them in a newsletter once a month. Don't try to overdo it, but be there to educate them on what the tools are and why they're important, and give them kudos on what they're doing. Even if someone reports as a spam, say, thank you for being so diligent. This looks like it's a spam. Explain the difference between a spam and a phish. And encourage them. If they're not part of the security solution, it just doesn't work. And I think the last thing is, never put on so much to the end user that they're going to find ways around it. Because in the end, something I've found is that users are really clever. End users are super clever, and they will find ways around things if you make things too difficult for them and if they're not taught. And that's part of the reason why I call it efficient security. Does it replace something I have? Does it fill a current need or solve a problem? And does it save me money? If it doesn't fit at least two of those, it's not going to be efficient for me, and it's not going to be efficient for my business. And it sure as heck isn't going to be efficient for the end users if I don't find it efficient. So for email, we have a Mailgate, and we have Tessian, and we've got another tool. The Mailgate we've made almost silent to the user. They don't see it. They know that if something happens, they know what to do to research mail for themselves. For the other tool, again, it's there for reporting. We have made it silent, except when the user wants to, choose to interact with it. Now with Tessian, users are asked to interact with it because things pop up and they say, all right, what do you do? Do you say, oops, you might have made a bad? But again, the training's key with that of, all right, why the heck is this orange thing popping up on my screen? What should I do with it? Or do I just randomly start clicking on things in order to make it go away? Why is it important? So when someone does report something and it says this was reported and confirmed as malicious, it's congrats, you did it. Or even a public company-wide, here are people who, got it 100% right. Thank you for doing this. And that gives them ownership. That makes it feel like they are making the decisions. I'm not forcing them to do something. They are making a decision on what to do with what they see as their property, their email, which makes tools more than just a widget. It makes it important because I'm giving them that choice and giving them help while guiding them in the security language at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I'm biased with some of this as well because, as you say, we're delighted that you're using Tessian for this. But I think having that interaction and involving employees is so key. Exactly as you say, making them feel part of the security strategy of a company. It's akin to giving them ownership in the company. Some companies give employee share options or shares, right? Everybody feels like an owner. I think it's exactly the same thing in security. We're all here to defend the organization that we are building every single day. And I think the more invisible a security team is, and the more that you actually try and abstract the user away from, things like threats and manage everything purely through a SOC, it risks creating an us and them culture where people actually don't, as you say, flag the unusual email or they don't feel that they can just go and ask a stupid question to somebody in the security team and say, hey, I might be wrong, but does this, is this legitimate? Should I do this? Or is it something worse? I think it's super, super important. I wanted to switch gears slightly and go back to that topic you raised at the beginning around financial services has dealt with privacy for a long time. And in many ways that preceded the surge in security and the practice of cybersecurity in the financial services industry. You mentioned the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act and the fact that this requires financial institutions to explain their information sharing practices to customers and also to safeguard that sensitive data. It would be good just to understand a bit more about what that actually is and why financial services has a particular focus and challenge around this.
Well, GLBA, I think, because it came out a while ago, it's 501B that we have to comply by. And it's privacy. And we talked about this before. Privacy is within information security. It doesn't include all cybersecurity at all whatsoever. But I think what happened when GLBA rolled out was we did get checkboxes. And that was a wonderful place to start 15 years ago. And it was. But if you want something fun, Tim, Google GLBA checklist. You will find like 30,000 pages of them. And it's not really... So you'll see, think of how many people are needed to be in your security. You need at least one. What was the risk assessment done on your security profile? Was your security plan monitored? Is it tested? Is it flexible? The problem with, and we get audited on this, and we get examined on it. So banks have to go through an annual audit where someone comes in and they check all of our controls and they make sure we're meeting all of our guidelines and that we're actually following through with all of our policies. And then every 18 months or less, financial institutions get an examination. And that's by the Federal Reserve, that's by the OCC, that's by the FDIC. They actually come in and they make sure we are following law and regulation. This is part of it. But when I say, did you do a risk assessment? That can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And I think what's coming up now, what banks are doing now, is they're trying to do more than just what we saw as the minimum, more than just the checkboxes, which I think is fantastic. They're realizing that the risk is greater than just the information risk. It's a risk to people. It's a risk to your staff. If your staff member is compromised on their personal email account, they might have an in to their business email account or vice versa. Where does responsibility fall if they have used the same password for their business email as they do for their personal email that has a bunch of personal health information in it? There's the realm of security is getting larger, and what GLBA allowed us to do was look at it from a privacy standpoint so we could narrow it down, so we could say, here are the crown jewels. But now the crown jewels have expanded a little bit. It's not just customer data. It's not just PII for our customers. It's internal things that are going on. I mean, you're looking at how far does your cybersecurity net reach? I mean, I'm sure you've done some OSINT on me. I can do some OSINT on you. There's a lot of info out there that then can get used to compromise a business. So now with the risk assessments, how far should that assessment go? Those are the questions being done now, which were born out of GLBA. And it's more going from I'm complying to the letter of the law to what the actual spirit is. And right now, we have to be cognizant of cybersecurity being created out of privacy. In my mind, in banking, that's how it was created, to keep privacy key, but then understand what does privacy mean. And as you've seen, I'm sure in California has the CCPA. The EU's got, GDPR, but we don't have that here. We don't have things. Every state has a different privacy idea or an idea about incident response. There's actually a rule change right now in the Federal Register about should there be a thing of all banking and bank service providers should have to report incidents occurring within a certain time frame. That wasn't the case for cybersecurity incidents. It was very vague. Talk sometime, as soon as possible. This is actually giving timeframes of third-party vendors, bank service providers, and banks have to notify the regulators, have to notify their customers if something happens. If a cybersecurity incident happens, that could have a material impact. Now, we're in 2021, and that's being discussed. And those are, I don't know, the things that we need to make sure as banks we're on top of, definitely, just because we're such essential institutions, but also what other businesses need to realize might become the new normal, especially if there are privacy laws or incident response laws or cybersecurity laws passed that will impact everyone.
Something every guest talks about on this podcast pretty much is around the skills gap in security. And as you're describing this, and we're thinking about changing regulation, these new laws that may come to pass, you have laws at the, you have them at the federal level, the state level, you have them specific to an industry. How do you find people that have got an awareness or a comfort or an expertise in all of these different areas? How do you manage the skills gap? How do you find the talent and the people who intimately understand all of this and are going to be able to, know exactly what needs to be done within your specific organization, but also the industry?
Honestly, I don't think that's not what I look for. We actually had this discussion. There's a neat institution called the Executive Women's Foundation, and we discuss about the skills gap a lot there. And often when you look at businesses, they'll look at high education, high certification, or IQ. How well did you pass this test? In my mind, in a weird holistic way that would probably make FI people cringe, you need to find someone who will share your goals. How hungry are you? How much do you want to learn? How interested are you in security, in privacy, in helping a financial institution protect their customers? Is that what can get you up every day? So when I hire, I look for that. I have some great people who came in with a couple years of help desk experience, or people who stagnated at their job, because I saw in them a passion that mirrored something that I wanted, or that mirrored my passion for helping people, to securing things, to learning more. Right now, I mean, I work with an elementary school. I've done some stuff with middle school, high school. So we're trying to help the pipeline. But the pipeline we need is now. And I think everyone can say that you can't find people now. It's sort of like finding a really good, Java or .NET developer. They're really hard to find. So what I've been doing, honestly, is training up. And have I lost people because I overtrain? Or yes. And I laugh about that when people say, well, you spent all this time getting this person up, and now they have, their CISSP or their CISA, and now they're leaving because you can't pay them what they want. I literally have laughed in someone's face about that, because I said, okay, so you're complaining that I made a security professional that's going to help us overall? No, that's our responsibility, is to keep self-perpetuating. And too often we've been looking at people, I mean, you've seen them, I'm sure, where they say, we want entry-level person with a CISSP, a CISA, a CEH, and who has at least 20 years experience in security, but it's entry-level. First thing we've got to do is talk to HR and hiring. And people have to understand that there are not enough people. So you need to start looking for not all of the checkboxes again. You need to start looking at the people who will just be good for your industry and say, I will commit to training you up. And I know that I may not be able to retain them, but while I have them, they're going to be brilliant.
Yeah. Sorry, Anne. I was gonna say, yeah, broadening those horizons is so key.
It is, because not everyone who has a CS degree or a development degree or a cybersecurity degree, now that we have them, is going to be the best cybersecurity professional. They're not. That doesn't mean as much as, oh, this is a fascinating problem. Why is this happening with InMap? Let me research. Oh, that's why this works like this. That's how these discoveries are made. That is so much more important to me, that inquisitiveness and wanting to learn and wanting to discover and being hungry for that knowledge, than, having 15 different certifications after your name.
Anne, thank you. This has been amazing. We really, really appreciate your time and also all of the advice and guidance that you've had for us and our listeners on the podcast. And we like to try and get to know all the guests on the Human Layer Security podcast by asking them some questions at random. And I've got 2 here for you today. The first is, what is the best book you've ever read that you'd advise all listeners go out and order right now?
I don't know if I would advise all listeners to go out and buy it. My favorite book is Cancer Word by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, because I truly believe that it's one of the best things about people.
And 3 guests I'd love to have to dinner are?
Morgan Freeman, Henry Cavill, that's very recent, and do they have to be alive?
No.
William Shakespeare. Just because. Did you write all of it? So, yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon. And I know you do a lot with us. We really do appreciate it. And I know that our listeners are really going to enjoy this. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with more human layer security insights in our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, you can visit our blog at tessian.com/blog, where you'll find lots of amazing content, advice, and tips. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.